Known for his edgy and overly inquisitive splashes of art, Johannesburg-based multidisciplinary artist Johan Stegmann is back with a new body of work. Titled From Tourism to Terrorism, this project is described as a riotous sightseeing horseback ride through the apocalypse. The solo exhibition is set to open on the 9th of August at the Lizamore and Associates gallery in Johannesburg, as well as presented virtually on the different online platforms. Johan is joining us now on Skype to tell us more about his current work. Johan, a very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us. Welcome.
Morning. Thank you very much for having me.
It's a pleasure, Johan. Speak to us about what really inspired this body of work.
So I've always been interested in the city centre of Johannesburg, which is where my studio is based. And, in explaining the inspiration for this work, it's almost a little bit difficult compared to my previous shows when I would have like a very well thought out theme and concept, and I would have this very intellectual explanation. And, when COVID-19 hit, it just became apparent that the whole world has changed and everyone is kind of trying to figure out themselves and what's going on and everything. And so for a moment, I didn't really know what I was going to do. And eventually I realized I'm just going to keep on doing what I'm doing, which is to draw images about what inspires me, which is coincidentally images that looks very much like the apocalypse in a way. If you think of the apocalypse not necessarily as a doomsday event, but more as an experience that you go through that kind of changes your view of the world around you. And for me, as an Afrikaans white guy from Pretoria, moving to and living in the city centre of Johannesburg has really done that for me. And I'm hoping that it will kind of resonate with where people are at the moment, with the whole world changing around them kind of thing.
Yeah, and I suppose it triggers that out-of-the-box thinking capabilities. And even with the title itself, it's quite a catchy title, From Tourism to Terrorism. And one then wonders, Johan, how those two very different narratives meet. Why did you title it as such? And what really is the significance behind this title?
Yes, I have to apologize. I think that was a bit of a misinformation. The terrorism to tourism is a beginning of how I describe it. The actual title is even more confusing. I've got a tendency to give my shows long and confusing titles. So the title is Now There Are Horses.
Now There Are Horses. Okay.
Yes, which is like a very bad translation of the Afrikaans term "nou sal perde," which means now we've got problems. And so, but yes, it's definitely about terrorism and tourism in a strange kind of way, because as a kind of just as an imaginary kind of playful narrative, I thought, what would the images look like if I imagined that myself and other Afrikaans white people were to go on a kind of a tourism horseback ride through the city centre of Johannesburg. And that would be, it would be a very strange and funny thing to do, but I think it evoked a lot of imagery that I like to work with, which is myself as a privileged white person in the city centre. Most of the time I'm in my car and it's kind of like the modern equivalent of a horse, and I'm very interested in engaging with the city centre, but it's to some extent a little bit like I'm a tourist. So that's kind of the tourism element, and the terrorism element. I think that is going to be a little bit of a surprise. If you come to the show, there's going to be an element there that's going to explain that. But it's about some of the things that's come out of my work through the years when I've looked at, the heritage of white Afrikaans people in South Africa, and just my surprise at realizing that, they always want to, not they, but some people always want to say, oh, Mandela used to plant bombs and he was like a terrorist. And they don't tell you, well, there was a lot of Afrikaans people who were also terrorists and also planting bombs, even doing terrible things. So that's something that I like to confront in my work, and there's going to be an interesting way that I'm going to bring it into the show.
Yeah, and the work that you produce and put out there for visual consumption and interpretation, what kind of conversations are you hoping will spark?
Well, I am I'm very interested in the concept of duality, when something can happen and there's both good things and bad things in it, which is what I find in, for example, just looking at my own heritage, looking at history especially. You find a lot of events where if you look at it from the one perspective, then these were the good guys and those were the bad guys. And if you look at it from a different perspective, it becomes more complicated. And so I think it's very fruitful for people to engage in history and engage with their own and each other's identities in this country, and rediscover, the different perspectives about the different things that happened, the different perspectives that we have on each other. And, it's a bit of a scary thing for people to approach, but in my experience, it's always been a very, very rewarding thing to do. So what I usually do is I try to incorporate images that can represent different opposing point of views at the same time. And then that becomes like a starting point for people to have a discussion about things.
Okay, and you say that sometimes your drawings blow up in your face. What do you mean by that, Johan? Is it perhaps your main medium is explosives?
Yes, that is literally one of the reasons I've been known for using explosives before to blow up work. So so that's a little bit of a joke where, the interesting thing about art, which is not like in other things in life that I've discovered, is there are certain things that you should not do, or that people typically expect that you should not do if you make art. And it's not that I disagree. In fact, I usually agree with those general rule of thumbs. But then I've found out that if you do that wrong or bad thing, and you just do it so wrong or so bad that then it actually becomes a good thing again. Like, for example, to blow up your own drawing, or to destroy something would generally be considered as a bad thing to do. But then if you do it in such a way, or in an interesting way, it can become an act of creation. If you, for example, are very upfront in your work about, I'm an Afrikaans white guy, I'm in a privileged position, I've got a problematic heritage, etc., etc., that would be something that you typically do not want to advertise to people. Yeah. That's typically in the art world not a very good idea to do. But then I found out, if you just do it honestly, if you kind of really try to face up to everything that involves, and you kind of really grapple with it, then it can become the opposite of a bad idea. It can become a very good and fruitful source of material and of art. So
Johan, you've added a totally different dimension to how we should view our art and how we should interpret art in its entirety. Thank you so much for chatting to us this morning. We appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
Well, speaking to us about his solo exhibition, From Tourism to Terrorism, that opens on the 9th of August at the Lizamore and Associates Gallery. That's a multidisciplinary artist, Johan Stegmann. Well, actually, as a matter of fact, he aptly named it Now There Are Horses. It is 5 minutes to 8. Let's take a look at some social media responses about our question of the day and a small town of choice. Let's take a look.